This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/mapperforward to find out how you can become a member today. Welcome to the final episode of the Daily Coffee Pro with Carlos de la Torre. How are you, Carlos?
I'm perfectly fine. I'm so happy for this
Excellent.
final episode.
It's been a long few hours, hasn't it?
It's been a very, very interesting conversation. It's fun.
Thank you.
It has peanut butter on it.
You've given me some really interesting things to consider that I hadn't considered before, and I love that. I love when I can have a conversation with someone and it ends up giving me things to start analyzing more. And our episodes, this conversation that we've had has definitely been that for me, so thank you. In this final episode, what I'd love to talk about is how the pandemic is faring for producers and how the supply chain is being affected, particularly by the ramifications of the pandemic. So, we spoke in one of the earlier episodes that 2022 is going to be perhaps the most challenging year so far for the pandemic, and COVID is going to be the least of those problems. Definitely here in Australia, we're in a very precarious situation at this point of the pandemic. And the reason is we've now come 2 years into the pandemic and the government was giving us a lot of support for the cafes and roasteries that were being affected by the pandemic. That's stopped. And so now what's happened is we have these very strict rules here that say if somebody is a close contact of someone who has COVID or one of your employees gets COVID, everyone who's a close contact has to quarantine for 10 days.
You're returning to Mexico.
Right. But what happens from that is if you then have to close your coffee shop for 10 days, then 10 days clears and then we open again and then we have to shut down again. And this is, Omicron. For Delta, the maximum number that we reached per day was 2,600. In Omicron, it was 92,000.
Wow.
Big difference. And so at least during the Delta wave of the pandemic, what would happen is that the government said, don't worry, if you have to close your businesses, we're going to give you whatever money you need as long as you can demonstrate that this is the sales that you had. And we're going to give employees money so that if they have to stay home, we're going to subsidize their wage for them. That's all gone. And now businesses are realizing the tap's been turned off. I have to fend for myself. The flow-on effect of that ends up stemming all the way back to producers. Everyone gets affected now. And that's how things are in Australia right now. And it's it's a very scary time for cafe owners and roasteries here in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me, for producers in Mexico, how are things faring for them at this point of the pandemic? Because a lot has changed since the beginning of the pandemic, from a pricing perspective, logistical perspective, all of it.
There are different types of producers in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them are smallholders. Maybe running the farm as a family business. But the ones who hire pickers, they ended up in the same position of the coffee shop owners, because
right,
the picker is maybe the the more vulnerable part of the chain.
Right.
They just don't have a good salary. They don't even have like medical care, and some of them are immigrants. You know, in the south of Mexico, some of the pickers are actually from Salvador, Guatemala, and they came and they don't even have nothing. No,
Yeah.
they live at the farm, and the producers need to deal with that problems, and the bigger ones. And the small ones deal with the logistic problems. Some of them cannot even have the opportunity to take their coffee out of the community because the travel to the closest city is
Locked
6
still.
hours, 8 hours, and you cannot transit properly. Even us, we have had a lot of, imagine, we live in a producing country, 4 hours away from a producing region, and we have stock problems with green coffee because we have one COVID case in the dry mill and all the production stopped for 15 days, and you have no coffee in 15 days. Some of the dry mills close the doors just to not receive some of the producers and customers. For example, we work with a dry mill in Oaxaca, and regularly we travel and we check the quality of the entire lot during the process. And this year we cannot attend because it was closed. Then this is difficult because we negotiate one price with the producer for a certain quality coffee. Then we process the coffee, and what we get is not supervised by anyone, and we get doubtful quality, pretty low one. But we need to pay what we have already agreed. Yeah, and that's complicated, and I'm pretty sure that most of the producers have this problem with the dry mills because they cannot supervise the processing, and also because just one case of COVID and you need to shut down the processing for at least 14 days, and the coffee gets stuck in the warehouse, and it gets humidity, the quality goes to the lowest points, and obviously with each copying point they lose money too. And but the good part of this pandemic is that almost any not super small producers, but the medium to the bigger ones have made an appearance in social media, and it was great.
Yeah,
because 6 years ago you need to travel an entire week in the mountains looking for the producers, trying to build relationships. And as I told you, some of the baristas turn to be roasters in small projects. And with no budget, how can they travel and find producers and build relationships? They don't need it because the producers are on Facebook sending a direct message telling you that, hey, I have coffee at this price, I can send you. It's easy, it's direct, and it's in social media. This helped a lot to the small business and the popping up the COVID generation, I call them, the
I
COVID
like
generation roasters, because it was easier for them to look for producers. And the producer have an entire network of professionals looking for coffee.
Yeah.
So it was great because if you get to put your coffee in one brand, they tag you, and any other professional can look for your product and build another relationship. The first year, it was confusing because you saw maybe not strong relationships because it was a huge offering of coffees. So the roasters, one week by one producer, and the next one another one and another one, and they doesn't build a proper relationship. But with the pass of the time, it happened, and the relationships flourished a lot.
And it's a new way of approaching the supply chain.
Yeah.
Which we had hoped pre-pandemic. We had hoped that more producers would get on social media so that we could decrease the distance between the producer and the consuming end of the supply chain, right?
That has a good and a bad phase. It's beautiful how producers get amazing feedback and compliments from customers. They really happy. They read me, hey, you post the photo of my coffee, and I got a message from some city in Mexico. Your coffee is amazing. Keep it going. But there's also some stupid baristas and consumers having a direct communication with these producers just to say your coffee sucks.
What?
Yeah.
I don't know why I'm surprised. Coffee people can be, people on the internet can be assholes. But why do this?
I don't know. I got a producer who called me and said, hey, can I pay for a bag because this customer asked me to reimburse the money? And I say, send it to me. He's my customer, it's not your customer. And it was difficult. And also, the other rough point of this kind of digital relationships is that you cannot build trust.
Right. The investment isn't there to cultivate the relationship.
Yes, it's very difficult. I have one coffee producer which I talk a lot by WhatsApp, and we made phone calls of 2 hours in the phone call.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, but we only met once. And he's one of our strongest relationships. This is something that the pandemic also put on the table, how relationships actually need frequency, because they don't. But it needs to be a deep conversation, and you need to have life. You need to be honest and trust in people. But some producers got bad experiences with people because when they have the coffee and the desperation to sell the coffee, they trusted some ugly people who just took the coffee and never paid, or maybe
these are the bad actors in our supply chain.
Yes, there were a lot of weird activities developing in the supply chain because the uncertainty of the social media conversation. So it was difficult because you cannot visit, and even if you can, it's not, it doesn't feel correct to go from a big city to a small community and probably bring your COVID with you.
Which really was a major concern, particularly at the beginning of the pandemic. It's like this whole new way we were structuring society. You're going to bring your COVID with you, and we don't want it. Don't come to our cities, don't come to our countries. Australia locked its borders, no one could come in. It became this kind of disrespectful thing when you were saying, I want to come and visit you at the farm. No, don't bring your COVID. Even in Brazil, I heard that, was it Colombia? It was in Colombia, actually, where they stopped the migratory workforce from within the country from moving around because they didn't want pickers to bring COVID from one region to the next region. I mean, it was real.
Yes, the producers here do want us to visit, and they invite all the buyers to visit because they were desperate to sell coffee, but it doesn't feel right. And something that happened is that the relationships moved from being maybe 2 visits in a year, or maybe 3, with one entire day of visiting farms, chatting, negotiation, eating, and maybe a couple of beers, and let's go home.
Yep.
And now we have a more continuous relationship because we have conversations via Instagram, WhatsApp, phone calls, and even I have a meeting with a group of producers with Skype last month. It was amazing because they are like 18 hours from here. And maybe we can explore these opportunities to understand the context of the producers, because the buyer only visits the producers during the harvest when everything is happiness. There's coffee ripening, there's people working. That's a show, that's beautiful. But what about the rest of the year?
Yeah.
And now the conversation is about, I have run out of money. I have no money for medicine for the plants. And my wife got sick. My son is getting married. It's more intimacy in this relationship.
Which goes back to what you were saying about empathy in the last episode, right?
Yes, that's beautiful. That's the beautiful part. Yeah.
Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.